We are slowly picking up the news, baby. The funny thing is, today's Toronto Maple Leafs news doesn't even really revolve around the topic we're talking about in this video. The biggest Maple Leafs news today was that John Tavares relinquished his captaincy and gave it to Auston Matthews. There was an entire press conference done about it. Tavares' kids were wearing Matthews' jersey. It was a pretty good moment, but a lot of people, I'd say, are sort of having this thought in the back of their minds. Okay, what happened? Okay, what does this mean for John? Okay, is this actually like the right thing to do now? I think if you had asked most Maple Leafs fans, hey, in 5 years, who's the captain of the team? Most people probably would have said Auston Matthews, right? But to do this in the middle of 2024, while John Tavares still has a year left, it is a pretty boggling move, but it is one of these things where it's like, okay, if they really wanted to force the direction right away, if they really wanted to rein things in, pull everything back to neutral, and try to start off fresh with a new set of guys, new mojo, then maybe this is the right thing to do right now. But when it comes to this video and the topic we are going over, what I wanted to do was talk about some comments about a former Toronto Maple Leaf and a huge scoop that was dropped onto a podcast earlier this week as to what some other people may be feeling about the Maple Leafs organization. Let's head over onto the latest edition of the Empty Netters podcast. Now, I'm pretty sure most of y'all are familiar with Empty Netters, but the episode we are talking about today is their 124th episode of the show. They had NHLer Nate Thompson on, and they talked about younger players that could make the jump. But in this video, if you go over to the 31-ish minute mark of the entire thing, the highlight on YouTube says Luke Evangelista. There's a quick aside for a comment made by one Dan Powers. He goes out there and talks about Ryan O'Reilly, former Toronto Maple Leaf, current Nashville Predator, and some apparent harsh feelings that were tossed out there when Ryan O'Reilly departed the Toronto Maple Leafs around this time last year. Now, we all kind of recognize the story. Ryan O'Reilly was a St. Louis Blues guy. Ryan O'Reilly was a championship-winning Blues guy. And then in 2022-2023, he wrapped up his stint with the Blues by getting traded over to Toronto, had 11 points in 13 games to end off that regular season, and 9 points in 11 playoff games as the Leafs made the second round. And then Ryan O'Reilly left Toronto, went over to Nashville, and it was kind of reported that they were like, okay, he doesn't like the spotlight in Toronto, it's too much of a hockey megalopolis for him to be comfortable, and he wants to go over to a team where hockey is more low-key, and he doesn't want to be a celebrity, so he went over to Nashville, had 69 points in 82 games played, very solid there. And honestly, those comments are kind of fair. Like, not everybody is going to be well-equipped for the rock star lifestyle, especially when you're a player on the Toronto Maple Leafs. I use this example for Vancouver and the Canucks, but I think the same thing reigns true for the Maple Leafs. If you're a celebrity here in Vancouver, if you're Ryan Reynolds, if you're Seth Rogen, even if you are a local Vancouver guy walking around the streets of Vancouver, I honestly think it's probably more likely you get more attention if you're Elias Pettersson or Brock Besser walking down the streets of this city instead of one of these mainstream celebrities. Like, people in Vancouver love their hockey, and it gets to a point of superstardom in the public eye that I think is very exclusive and unobtainable, even if you are some of the best Hollywood stars in movies. I would like to think that it's the same thing in Toronto, although I acknowledge Hollywood North, it's a little bit different. Vancouver versus Toronto, you're much more likely to see a celebrity walking down shooting a movie here in downtown Van than you might be in the Six, but either way, Toronto still has its fair share of media production, right? We all remember Denis Villeneuve and his fantastic masterpiece of a Jake Gyllenhaal movie, Enemy. Either way, all movie tangents aside, Ryan O'Reilly was not really equipped for that, and that's totally fine. But the comments made by Dan Powers on our Empty Netters podcast interview go out there and say this. I was talking to someone who knows Ryan O'Reilly very well, and he had talked about his time in Toronto, and it was like, certain people on this Toronto team will he went to management and was like, blank, blank, and blank will never win, and I don't want to be here anymore. And he's not saying that about the people in his locker room right now. And so, obviously this is from a year ago, right? But listening to this scoop from Powers, who I don't want to go out there and say doesn't have his sources. I mean, the podcast, they literally have Nate Thompson sitting down giving them information, and he's like, you know, in studio. So this is totally like a connected group of guys. Dan Powers, knowing somebody who spoke to O'Reilly about his time in Toronto, certainly is not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, I'd say it's very likely. So to hear from this perspective that apparently Ryan O'Reilly's attitude towards Toronto internally was like, hey, you've got a bunch of dudes, blank, blank, and blank is the words that Powers said, so maybe 2 or 3 guys on this team that are never going to win. And I don't want to be here anymore because of that. Maybe the entire thing that he had talked about with the superstardom and the fame and the popularity and the spotlight and everybody loving you on the streets, maybe that's true. Like, to an extent, I could understand how most human beings would not be able to handle that. It takes a certain kind of profile to be able to live with the expectations that are on your shoulders every single day when you go to the grocery store. But for Ryan O'Reilly to go out there and say this element about the team not being able to win either, firstly, he has the right. I'd say that out of all people, Ryan O'Reilly, who has gone through multiple long playoff runs and who was a Stanley Cup champion, a Conn Smythe winner with the St. Louis Blues in 2019, out of everybody on the planet who has the right to criticize the team that he is on for saying, hey, these guys are not able to win, it's probably the Conn Smythe winner. Straight up. And now, for O'Reilly to be going over to Nashville and play with a group of guys that, in Dan Powers' words, he's not complaining about, I mean, it makes sense. You think about the guys who play in Nashville. The Preds play a defensively minded, shut-down, hard work, forechecking kind of game, and it gave the Vancouver Canucks a lot of trouble. We were saying this throughout the entire first round of the playoffs this previously completed year, excuse me, but Nashville's only problem was that they couldn't score. They did a really good job at holding off the Vancouver Canucks, but ultimately the Canucks and their star power were able to overcome the defensive tower that were the Nashville Predators. I mean, the Canucks scored 3 goals in like however many minutes to tie up and win that game 4 in overtime. They were down by 2 with like 2 minutes left, and then they won. That's crazy. The Nashville Predators, if they just got 1 more goal, if they just held on to play a little bit longer, they would have tied the series up and it would have gone back over to Vancouver 2-2, and it's an entirely new ball game. Who knows how the Preds play against the Oilers if they make it to round 2 instead of Vancouver. But at the end of the day, this Nashville team has so many guys, personnel-wise, that know how to win. And they just got Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault too. Ryan O'Reilly is going to have a great crew around him in Stammer, Yossi, Marshy, not to mention Philip Forsberg, who just had a career year. Nyquist. Gustav freaking Nyquist. Not Nyquist, good buddy of mine, but Gustav Nyquist is still doing his thing and kicking around there. He had a career season too. A lot of good things going on in the Nashville Predators organization, and Ryan O'Reilly's looking forward to it. But to hear from his perspective that the guys on the Toronto Maple Leafs, there are 2 or maybe 3 of them that are never going to win, that's concerning. And it doesn't take a genius to try to put the pieces together and come up with ideas as to what he could be talking about, whom it is on the Maple Leafs roster that he could be talking about. One might easily assume that a guy like Mitch Marner's name is on that list, but of course, you know, we're not going to fill in the blanks ourselves entirely here, just kind of insinuate the idea. But with the news from today that John Tavares officially handed over the captaincy to Austin Matthews, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about how Ryan O'Reilly feels about this Maple Leafs team, about how this team is filled with guys that are not going to win, and what you think he really means by that. Obviously, like, Ryan O'Reilly is not going to call out middle to bottom tier players. He's not going over to management and saying, yeah, Ryan Reeves can't win. Like, no, he's not doing that. Nick Robertson can't win. Pontus Holberg can't win. No, he's not saying that. In order to get to a point where he's angrily calling out players on his team, he probably has to have some sort of an expectation for those guys. You're not going to get disappointed with the way that Bobby McMahon is playing. Like, no, that doesn't really work that way. You're going to get disappointed if your top-tier guys are not being top-tier guys, and those guys are not the ones pulling their weight and winning. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If Ryan O'Reilly was talking about a guy like Marner, maybe Tavares, Nylander, Matthews, maybe I don't really want to say Ryan O'Reilly, but maybe him. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about his comments over here. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.